Our national monuments are, to put it lightly, not doing so hot right now. So I wanted to whip up this little video for you to highlight how important national monuments have been in the history of our national parks. I want to share with you every single one of our current national parks that started as a national monument. Of our current 63 capital N, capital P national parks, 27 started their life as a presidentially proclaimed national monument. 42%, nearly half of our national parks today, started as national monuments. Here's all of them. Presidential proclamations only for this vid, no congressional monuments because they're not really the ones being threatened right now, and we're going in chronological order. All right, rapid fire, here we go. Petrified Forest National Monument in Arizona was established in 1906 by Teddy Roosevelt as the fourth ever national monument. It was later enlarged 4 different times by 2 separate presidents, including 3 times by Herbert Hoover. It became a national park in 1962. Lassen Volcanic National Park in California first started as 2 separate national monuments, Cinder Cone and Lassen Peak, both proclaimed by Teddy Roosevelt in 1907. They were combined and redesignated as a national park in 1916 under the newly created National Park Service. The Grand Canyon, probably the most famous use of the Antiquities Act in history. Teddy Roosevelt proclaimed a Grand Canyon National Monument in 1908. He famously said of it during a previous visit there in 1903, quote, "Leave it as it is. You cannot improve on it. The ages have been at work on it, and man can only mar it," end quote. Grand Canyon National Park was designated in 1919, but then Herbert Hoover used the Antiquities Act again in 1932 to create another Grand Canyon National Monument, which later became just part of the park itself. Then there's Pinnacles National Park in California, first created back in 1908 by, you guessed it, Teddy Roosevelt. It was subsequently enlarged 6 separate times by 5 different presidents before being redesignated as a national park in 2013. That's right, one of our newest national parks is one of our oldest national monuments. And for Teddy Roosevelt's final use of the Antiquities Act, he created Mount Olympus National Monument in 1909 under the management of the United States Forest Service, much to the chagrin of the powerful logging interests. It later became, of course, Olympic National Park in 1938. Mukuntuweap National Monument was proclaimed in 1909 by President William Howard Taft, later to become the world-famous Zion National Park in 1919. The monument was enlarged once by Woodrow Wilson in 1918, and actually a separate monument was proclaimed by FDR in 1937 that was later added to the park in 1956. Acadia National Park. Yes, Acadia was an Antiquities baby. Our first national park east of the Mississippi River and our first national park to be created out of donated land. Woodrow Wilson used his authority under the Antiquities Act to accept those donations and create Sur de Mont National Monument in 1916, later to become a national park in 1919. Wilson then proclaimed a more than 1 million acre Katmai National Monument in Alaska in 1918. It was enlarged 4 separate times before being changed to a national park in 1980 with the passage of ANILCA. Great Basin National Park in Nevada started off as Lehman Cave National Monument, proclaimed by Warren G. Harding in 1922, before being redesignated to a national park in 1986. Bryce Canyon started as a national monument, first proclaimed by Harding in 1923, became a national park in 1928. Calvin Coolidge proclaimed the Carlsbad Caverns National Monument in New Mexico in 1923, before it became a national park in 1930. And then, in 1925, Silent Cal used the Antiquities Act again to proclaim a 1 million+ acre Glacier Bay National Monument in Alaska. It was enlarged by FDR to the tune of another nearly 1 million acres in 1939, before becoming a national park in 1980, again under ANILCA. And then we get to Herbert Hoover, who was very active with his use of the Antiquities Act. 6 of his national monuments later became national parks, the most of any president, starting with Arches in 1929. Enlarged 2 separate times and became a national park in 1971. 1932, he proclaimed Great Sand Dunes, which became a national park in 2004, and then in 1933, he proclaimed White Sands, which was enlarged 2 separate times and became one of our most recent national parks in 2019. After that, again in 1933, Hoover proclaimed Death Valley National Monument. It was enlarged 2 separate times before becoming our largest national park in the lower 48 in 1994. 1933 was a very busy year for Hoover because he also created Saguaro National Monument that year, enlarged once in 1961 by JFK before becoming a national park in 1994. And then, just for good measure, again in 1933, Hoover created Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Monument in Colorado, which became a national park in 1999 after 2 enlargements by FDR. Speaking of FDR, he was pretty active in the national monuments game as well. Starting with Fort Jefferson National Monument in Florida in 1934, it later became Dry Tortugas National Park in 1992. FDR proclaimed nearly 1 million acres of Mojave Desert as Joshua Tree National Monument in 1936, which became, of course, a national park in 1994 under the California Desert Protection Act, just like Death Valley, same act. Then, in 1937, FDR proclaimed Capitol Reef National Monument in Utah, enlarged twice before becoming a national park in 1971. In 1938, he proclaimed the Channel Islands off the coast of California. The monument was enlarged by Truman in 1949 and became a national park in 1990. And then we get the 2 special cases of the Antiquities Act being used as it relates to national parks. Grand Teton National Park was not created by presidential proclamation. It became a national park in 1929 through an act of Congress. But FDR did use the Antiquities Act to create Jackson Hole National Monument adjacent to the existing Grand Teton National Park in order to protect the scenic lowlands at the base of the mountains, and which did eventually become part of today's Grand Teton National Park. This was a very controversial action at the time. It's a huge thing. I actually have a whole video about this. You should definitely go check it out. It's a good video, one of my favorites. And then, similar situation in Denali National Park, also originally created through an act of Congress in 1917, but Jimmy Carter, who has just a massive, massive legacy of conservation in this country, I just did a video on him, created an adjacent national monument of over 1 million acres in 1978 right next to the existing Denali National Park. This was later added to the national park in 1980 as part of, you guessed it, Anoka. But that's not all Jimmy Carter did in Alaska. With that same proclamation creating the Denali National Monument, Jimmy Carter also created 4 separate gigantic national monuments that all became national parks in 1980 under Anoka. Gates of the Arctic, Kobuk Valley, Lake Clark, and Wrangell St. Elias. He also enlarged the previously proclaimed Katmai and Glacier Bay national monuments, meaning he single-handedly protected millions of acres of Alaskan wilderness, including land in every single national park in Alaska today. And that, my friends, is each of the 27 national parks, again, nearly half, that started their lives as national monuments created through the Antiquities Act. I know that was probably like trying to drink through a fire hose to understand all those dates and figures and parks and everything like that, but my point here, hopefully, was to show you just how important the Antiquities Act has been through the history of conservation in America. Look how many of our current national parks were created through it. I didn't even mention also the countless uses of the Antiquities Act for places that didn't later end up as national parks, including a bunch of places that aren't even in the national park system. Comment down below if you want to see that video. We're talking every national park in Alaska, except for Denali, originally created through the Antiquities Act. 4 out of Utah's mighty 5 were created through the Antiquities Act. 4 out of the 10 most popular national parks in America last year, that data was just released and suppressed, you should definitely go and check it out, was created through the Antiquities Act. Parks from Maine to Florida, California to Alaska, deserts, rainforests, Arctic tundra, coral reefs. Hell, 12 of the monuments I just mentioned were later enlarged, meaning more protections were added to them. Spoiler, it's because they're popular. The Antiquities Act has been used to protect some of our most iconic landscapes, places that are embedded in the identities of local communities and states and in our entire country as a whole. I mean, Arizona is the Grand Canyon state and has saguaros on its license plates. Utah has Delicate Arch on its license plates. Fat Bear Week in Katmai National Park is an absolute cultural juggernaut every single year. Cadillac Mountain in Acadia is the first place to see the sunrise in the entire United States. Death Valley, hottest place in the world. Joshua trees are icons of California. They inspired a freaking U2 album, for crying out loud. Do you think that album would have ever been made if all the Joshua trees had been paved over for parking lots and condos? Of course not. All of these things are only possible because the Antiquities Act allows presidents to protect special places in America before they are otherwise destroyed. Is it controversial sometimes? Sure, the plight of Bears Ears is testament to that, but that's nothing new. When FDR created Jackson Hole National Monument, people were pissed. And still to this day, the Antiquities Act is not allowed to be used in the state of Wyoming without congressional approval because of that. But you know what? People love Grand Teton National Park today. All of it, including the parts that were created through the Antiquities Act. It's one of the most beloved and most visited national parks in America. Jimmy Carter's Alaska proclamations were very controversial, so much so that they burned him in effigy when he did that. But you know what? Alaska's national parks are beloved today and contain some of the last remaining true wilderness areas on this planet. When Teddy Roosevelt created Mount Olympus National Monument, the logging industry was pissed. But now, Olympic National Park is, you guessed it, one of the most beloved parks in America. National parks are popular, national monuments are popular, and conservation is popular. By and large, the American people want more protections and more protected places, not less. The Antiquities Act is just one of the ways that goal is achieved and has been used for over 100 years by both parties to create national monuments that now protect some of, you guessed it, our most beloved places. There is a link in the description to an autofill form where you can voice your support for our national monuments. Super easy, please go fill it out. If you'd like to support my work and help me keep making these videos and educating people about the wonders of national parks and public lands, you can do all of the normal things that YouTube says will help this video, or you can support me directly on Patreon. That is always appreciated as well. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.